What do you think of this idea of kind of the commodification of culture? Like, personally, I think I kind of know what he's getting at. Like, a lot of times you'll see a very authentic event, even like an activist event or cultural event. A good example was where I grew up. There was a big LGBT pride parade every year, and then over the years it will become increasingly commercialized, and the feel of the event will go from being something that's very community focused and organic to something that feels like a big advertisement parade. I mean, there's still a lot of good in it, but it changes the feel of it completely. And I think that does kind of affect happiness and especially meaning. Like both the Žižek and Peterson talked a lot about like searching for something deeper and searching for meaning and kind of like falling into these things, and this authenticity as being part of happiness. And I do think that the commercialization of culture can negatively affect that.
Yeah, it's something I've seen a lot in hip hop. So like in the 80s, breakdancing became popular and everybody was trying to cash in on that. They were making movies about it. And then it got so popular that it got forced back underground. And then you had like the more political hip hop, like Public Enemy and stuff. And then the gangster rap kind of got really popular with Tupac and then Snoop Dogg and stuff. And yeah, I think it makes it cheaper, obviously. It makes it not what it once was. And this is actually, I guess this is a longer cycle with Black music in the US, because it tends to be what goes on, like the music gets forced underground and people come up with something new and different, and then it gets exploited until it's meaningless.
Yeah, I mean, I think you see this a lot in sort of subcultures that become popular, where you have, this small group of people who are all working together, and they all have this kind of shared sense of meaning, and they're all getting stuff done. And then, suddenly they reach this tipping point where, they can just do a bunch of marketing and not necessarily provide more value beyond that point. They just kind of like, okay, now we're well known. Now we can just exploit this by putting out kind of shallow, meaningless stuff. And yeah, I think that kind of almost everything seems to kind of go that way. Everything that has meaning seems to eventually kind of, at the very least, like cycle in and out of meaning. Like maybe there's this kind of peak meaning, and then this kind of like peak nihilism, and then maybe it comes back. Maybe it gets rejuvenated. But I do think that Žižek and Peterson kind of more or less agreed on that point, that in both a capitalist system and a communist system, if you take on some responsibility for yourself, you'll probably have a much more meaningful life than if you just, sit in the Garden of Paradise and, enjoy all of your material wealth, but never actually, try to produce anything of value. So I think they definitely both agreed on that. And actually, to me, it just feels like this debate. It felt like Žižek kind of forfeited the debate, like right at the beginning, and then they just had a conversation. And then Peterson just kind of brought him over to his side, and they both were like, "Yeah, let's do this again." Like we agreed on everything. That was great.
I think one area of disagreement between Žižek and Peterson that I can identify, like to get back to the commodification of culture question, is like one thing I used to think about a lot when I was reading more Marx is like this idea that something that money does is it imposes like a universal standard of value on everything it touches. So money creates like an equivalence between everything that you attach a monetary value to. And that can be like, so my table becomes quantitatively comparable to this apple, becomes quantitatively comparable to my shirt, becomes quantitatively comparable to an education, becomes quantitatively comparable to healthcare, becomes quantitatively comparable to parts of my body that I can sell. And it's to the point where it's kind of related to like what we were talking about yesterday with like, I think Martin Buber, the I and thou guy, ironed out. Yeah. So it's like the idea that you can either relate to everything in the world as like a set of objects and they each have a certain utility or value to you that you assign to them. And then you're just like, you're going through the world like an operator, like using things and seeing what's useful and what's not useful and categorizing things that way. And capitalism and money really encourage that. And Peterson talks about the value of that. There's definitely a value to that. But there is some way that like the spiritual essence of things that can't be quantified is lost.
Well, and I think that capitalism encourages you to think about what something's market value is, and the market value of something is almost by definition different from how you would value something. So there's two ways of looking at the table or your apartment or, you know, your kidney that you can sell or something like that. You know, there's how much will other people value this if I sell it to them? And then there's how much is this value? How much do I value this thing? And I think, honestly, it's a really good idea to look at life in terms of how you value things, because that's how you can prioritize which things are worth doing. If you're only focusing on how much the market values something, then yeah, you'll tend to overvalue things, or undervalue things.
Well, it gets back to like what Žižek was talking about a little bit, like the culture of commodification is like the market gets into our heads too. Like it's not just that we're like these like beings that are like in our own little temples and we value certain things and we value them because our soul wants us to value them. Like he said like the totalitarian society or the market, like it gets into our heads, or you can have like Peterson talks about this too, like ideological possession. Like you're not just yourself, you're also all these like little chattering mini personalities. And it's like, do I really want like the Mars bar, or is that really like me valuing it, or is it something else?
I think oftentimes it's something else. Chris, I mean, you're right. Like individuals within whatever kind of system can place their own value judgments on things, but so much of what we value is based on what subliminal messages that we're receiving. Like advertising is a multi-billion-dollar industry for a reason. It
Right.
absolutely works. And there's studies like, I think if you show somebody the same image like 8 times, it takes a certain amount of exposure to like get an idea or a desire into somebody's head. And like oftentimes the more they're exposed, the more it becomes kind of part of their unconscious psyche. And then you can get desires springing from that otherwise may not have been there.
Right, exactly. So we have these values, these internal values, and certainly most people probably put a little too much value on, they let other people's values influence their own values. And to a certain extent, you want to do this so that you can, align yourself with your society. But if you only pay attention to what your society puts value on, then yeah, that cheapens the hell out of your life, and yeah, probably makes it feel kind of depressing and meaningless.
Yeah, it's interesting also because it's like, it's not a simple decision, right? Like, am I going to be an independent person or am I going to be a conformist? I choose independent person. I've made the choice. Like, it's not a simple conscious decision. Like, it's like Žižek and Peterson both seem to recognize that it's like so much of what influences us is like deep in our subconscious, either from our own lives or from how we've been conditioned by society. And often like the choice to be like a simple rebel is like a greater conformity even than being a conformist. So it's like the process to actually be a free thinker. I think at one point, I forget which of them, I think it was Žižek, I don't want to say the wrong one, but one of them said like you have to always live on the edge of you have to live at the edge of your ideas and at the edge of your comfort and at the edge of your beliefs, and you always have to be like basically like this being of moral courage to be able to be really.
Yeah,